Hello, welcome. I'm Micah. Today I'm going to be talking about the Kripkenstein Paradox, as you will have gathered if you've clicked on this. So I took a class on Ludwig Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations this past semester, and along the way we went over Kripkenstein. And so after the semester, I read Kripke's lecture / little mini book on it, and I wrote a paper on this and updated like a contemporary response to it. So it's something I've been very interested in, and there's only like a couple videos about it on YouTube, only like a couple accessible level sources on it. And since it's such an interesting problem in philosophy, I thought it should get a little bit more exposure, and perhaps my particular way of putting it will be helpful for some people, more so than others have been. So that's the hope, at least. I should say at the outset, as a just kind of preliminary note, that it's pretty technical material going on in Kripke with this one, and I'm kind of doing a scatter shot in this video of like the first roughly 55 pages of his book, Wittgenstein on Rules in Private Language. So there's going to be some stuff glossed over, and as I'll say at the end, if there's any clarification needed, let me know. But without further ado, let's get into it. So to start off, if my slides will work. Are they not going to? There we go. So for a little bit of historical background, as I said, this paradox comes from Saul Kripke's book, Wittgenstein on Rules in Private Language, and he is inspired by Wittgenstein's comments on rule following and private language in philosophical investigations. Roughly sections, oh gosh, what is it? Like from the mid 200s to early 300s is where the core of it is. At least most people take it to be from around like 248 onwards. But as Kripke points out, really the crux of the rule following considerations are said by Wittgenstein in section 202, when he talks about how following a rule and thinking you're following a rule have to be different things. So Kripke takes the core of Wittgenstein's purpose and investigations to be the advancement of this skeptical paradox about meaning. And so this is how Kripke reads Wittgenstein, and he's clear about the fact that, well, what I'm presenting here is not Wittgenstein's view per se. That is the job of Wittgenstein scholars, but he said you can just read this as Wittgenstein's argument as it occurred to Kripke. So it's not necessarily something Kripke buys. It's also not necessarily something Wittgenstein would say. So that's what has led to the term, this is the Kripkenstein paradox. This is Kripkenstein is advancing this. This is sort of like Kripke's reconstruction of what he takes to be Wittgenstein's argument. I would like to at some point do a video on what Wittgenstein would think of this, because he's not up to exactly what Kripke thinks he's up to, but it's also not entirely wrong to think of him as advancing a paradox in a way. So there's a lot going on there, but that's not the purpose of this video. We're just talking about Kripkenstein. So it should be clear that this is a paradox that can be read independently of Kripke or Wittgenstein's views as individual philosophers. So what is the paradox? Well, hopefully I'm not in the way of this. Here we go. Suppose that you're working your way down a sheet of math homeworks. You've got addition problems and you're going through it, like maybe starting at the beginning. You've got a lot of time on your hands. 1 + 1, 1 + 2, so on and so forth. So for all of us, especially people like me, I'm very bad at math. It would come very quickly a point in working out this set of problems that I'm going to come to a set of numbers I've never added before. And the number will vary for individual people based on their like mathematical skill and learning and such. But for every human being, because our brains are finite, we're going to come to an addition problem we've never seen before. So I'm going to come to a set of two numbers that I've never added before together. And so will everybody if they're working their way down this sheet of like infinite math homework, which sounds like something you'd have to do in hell. So perhaps, so the actual numbers obviously are going to vary. They're going to be very large, but Kripke uses the example of like, let's just say it's 68 and 57. Obviously, I think we've all had to do this through about 9th grade, at least numbers that big, but it's variables, so x and y, and we're plugging in 68 and 57 for x and y to get the paradox across. So I read those as whatever numbers you need to plug in for any person in order for the paradox to get across. So, for someone like me, this could be somewhere in the thousands, and for someone who, you know, did well in math in high school, it could be in like the hundreds of thousands or something. So you come to these new numbers that you've never added together before, 68 and 57, you know, and you go, okay, I've never done this before, but 125, like you just carry out the same thing. And so you think that there are two senses in which this is the correct answer, right? Like for one thing, it's arithmetically correct. Like you've done the mathematical rules within the system, within the axioms of addition, and you've got the right answer. And then there's a second sense in which it's correct. It's metalinguistically correct. Now, the hell does that mean? That means metalinguistic correctness means that you performed the function you meant to perform, and that you always meant to perform. So another way of putting this is that, well, your past use of the plus symbol denoted a function such that when you carry that function out, it will yield 125 in response to 68 plus 57. So the idea of metalinguistic or metasemantic correctness is a little bit tricky if you're not used to this kind of thing. But basically, yeah, just think of it as metalinguistic correctness is you meant the same thing. You carried out the function you meant to, something like that, as I've spelled it out here. So the Bizzare skeptic, the Kripkenstein skeptic. Kripke imagines a skeptic that questions the second condition here, the metalinguistic correctness of our addition problem. Now, such a person would perhaps be crazy, but that's not the point. So they might question that when I carry out this problem, I meant the same thing by the plus symbol that I always did. They might say, well, what makes it the case that you meant the same function by that plus symbol that you did in all these past cases? As we stipulated, you never added those numbers together before. So all those times in the past that you used the plus symbol, well, perhaps you didn't actually mean the plus function. Maybe you meant the quus function. Now, what's the quus function? This is where things start to get fun. I've spelled it out here. I don't know how helpful this is going to be, so I'll try to give the ordinary language. So the quus function is, so well, to start with the plus function, the plus function would just be x plus y equals x plus y. So that's plus, right? 68 plus 57 equals 68 plus 57, which is 125. But the quus function is x plus y equals x plus y if and only if x plus y is going to yield a result that's less than 125. So all the cases you've done before. Otherwise, you should answer 5. And then go on answering 5 for every other case beyond that, those numbers. Any case is going to give you, as a result, an answer larger than this. You should answer 5. So, well, all the cases you had performed in the past yielded a result that was less than 125. So when you come to this new case, well, how do you know you were supposed to do this, x plus y equals x plus y, and not quus? Because you've never done it before. So all the past cases are equally compatible with your meaning plus or quus. So, and can you really be confident that the metalinguistic correctness of your carrying out the function is correct? So as stipulated, this is a new addition problem for you. So all your past uses of that symbol, the plus symbol here, are equally compatible with it denoting the plus function or the quus function, because all the past cases would be the same either way. So this is part of this finitude point. The total of any of our actual cases of the use of the symbol will always be finite. So what is it in virtue of that we can then apply that to an infinitely many new cases of addition? That's the idea, is that you're supposed to be giving yourself a rule for a finite number of cases that will then apply to an infinite number of cases. But how can that be the case? All the finite cases will only ever justify those finite cases, it seems like, because when you come to the new problem you've never seen before, well, everything you've done in the past could mean plus, could mean quus. There's nothing that distinguishes them. So says the Bizzare skeptic. So to clarify what's going on here, there are two conditions a reply to the skeptic is going to have to satisfy. First, there's a metaphysical, or you could probably call it extensional condition, which is to ask, well, what fact or facts make it the case that you meant plus and not quus? So what makes it true that you actually, in all those past cases, meant to denote the plus function, not the quus function? The second condition is normative. What justifies you in responding with 125? The normative condition's a bit slippery. So a lot of the objections and replies will kind of focus on the metaphysical, with the exception of dispositionalism, which we'll talk about. But Jared Warren, in his recent paper 2020 on Kripkenstein, kind of, I think, rightly points out that the normative condition is a little bit tricky, what's actually being asked for here. But you can think of it in terms of semantic normativity, like you're justified in responding with X to Y if responding with X to Y is like the appropriate like semantic function. So they're connected in the sense that, well, you only ought to give the answer 125 if plus really denotes the addition function. So if it denotes the plus function, well, then you ought to answer 5 because that you're carrying out the right function, which could be plus, could be quus. So it's worth pointing out that this is not an epistemic paradox, at least not directly. The point is metaphysical. We're asking about what facts about you or about your mental state in the past make it the case that you always meant to denote this function. So you can see you can change around pretty much any of the epistemic facts, and the paradox is still going to arise. There may be epistemic conditions that come into play here and there, but it's not, at least not directly, primarily, or first and foremost, a question about what you know, about you knowing whether you meant plus or quus. It's about, well, what would make it the case? What kind of fact could make it the case that you did or did not? So that's the basics of the paradox in its initial form, and it's helpful to get a little bit clearer on it by surveying a couple examples. I'm going to be, all of this is a introductory presentation, but I might have to dig into more on some of these responses in future videos to get clear on exactly what's going on. But hopefully this helps clarifying. I mentioned rule following earlier, and obviously this comes out of Wittgenstein's comments on rule following. So, well, wasn't I just following the rules? Can I just say that, well, when I learned how to add, I learned to count or whatever, I learned the rule that, like, when you add two numbers together, I just learned the rule, x plus y equals x plus y, regarding how to add. And when I come to a problem of this new problem, 68 plus 57, well, I just go on doing what I always did. I go on following the rule I learned. So you can imagine this response going like, well, I just do what I always did. The problem with that is, as we talked about past cases finitude, what I always did, what you've always done, is equally compatible with plus or quus. Everything you've done could have been quadding, not adding. You come to this new case and it's like, well, I did what I always did. Well, if Sceptic's right, then you should say 5 because what you always did was quad. So you should quad now and answer 5 in response. So both adding and quadding, plus and quus, enjoy identical levels of support from all the finite instances that I've added or you've added. And the same thing goes, you might just think like, well, I learned to count, so I put the numbers in this one-to-one correspondence. I carry out the function. I learned to count. It's like, well, maybe you actually learned to count. Maybe you learned to put these numbers together when they're at a certain of a certain size, but then once they get beyond that size, well, you add them together, you get 5. So the same problem arises if you just say like, well, don't I just do what I always did, or don't I just count? I learned to count. It's like, well, what you always did, what you always learned to do, how you learned to count could have been counting, could have been quounting, could have been adding, could have been quadding, could have been plus or quus. So this isn't going to work. And it's part of the reason it's not going to work is elucidated a bit better by Wittgenstein than by Kripke himself when he talks about what it would mean to grasp something at a stroke. Like, what would it mean to, in one instant, grasp something such that you could then apply it to an infinite number of future cases? And it's not clear at all what that would look like. And similarly, he talks about rules for interpreting rules. Like, well, I grasp how to follow a rule at a stroke. And it's like, well, what am I grasping? It seems like, is there some picture that pops into my head of like, okay, plus function, there we go, I got the function that popped into my head. It's like, well, but then you actually taking that picture or whatever occurs to you and then using that picture as a guide to then go on adding, it's like, well, then you've interpreted that picture a certain way. And how do you know you've interpreted the picture a certain way? You don't have just a picture of adding as a function. You have a picture and an interpretation. You have a rule and an interpretation of a rule. So it's not like you can just add a stroke, go, I'm doing the same thing I always did. It's like, well, what did you learn when you learned how to add? Did something just popped into your head? It seems like the criteria for whether or not you added is you should be able to go on adding. And so that's partially the key to what Wittgenstein would say about this, but there's more. But it helps to undermine this simple case of like the idea that you could just grasp a rule in an instant that will then go on to apply to an infinite number of future cases seems suspect at best. Well, what about if you could just say, can't I just say, All right, well, what makes it the case that I meant plus instead of quus is that I was, and I am, disposed to answer 125 when I'm presented with 68 plus 57. So all these past cases, what I did, they've kind of like built up this disposition into me. Now when I come to this case, like this is just what I'm, you know, just kind of what I go on to do. Um, this is where that normative condition comes back in a little bit, where, well, it seems like a reply to the skeptic has to explain why I'm justified in answering 125 in response to 68 plus 57. But you're not always going to be disposed to give the right answer. In fact, a lot of us, self-included, to an extreme extent, are disposed to do math wrong or to mean the wrong thing, even in ordinary language cases. Like some people just are habitually use words incorrectly. We all have friends like this. I won't name any of them in case they're watching, but we all have friends that are just disposed to use words incorrectly. And I, for example, am disposed to say, like not be able to figure out like what's a good example? Like I'm really bad at graphing anything geometrically, like y equals mx plus b, calculating slopes. I was all throughout high school disposed to do that wrong, disposed to carry out the steps wrong. So what I'm disposed to do is not always going to track the answer I actually ought give. So it seems like this isn't going to help, whether it be ordinary language or mathematical. And it also fails on the grounds, we're talking about finitude again here. There are some numbers so large that my finite brain is just not really disposed to do anything with them. Like I don't have any dispositions that cover, say transfinite arithmetic or transfinite calculus. Like when you're adding, like say you have Cantorian set theory, you're adding different levels, like sizes of infinities together. It's like, well, I'm not really disposed to do anything with adding infinities together. My brain's just, all the finite cases just don't cover that, don't even begin to cover that. The complete set of my dispositions is always going to be finite. So you could say restate the quos function as like, well, x plus y equals x plus y in cases where I'm disposed to answer x plus y. But otherwise, if it's larger than I have dispositions to give, then 5. So we still have the paradox. And more fundamentally, as Kripke points out, the dispositionalist response just kind of misconceives what's going on of what the skeptic is challenging, which they were asking for some past fact about me that could justify my responses in the present. But it seems like what's being appealed to is a present, like I'm just disposed to do this now. And the further question is, well, why are you disposed to do this now? And how do your past dispositions cover the correct disposition in this case? So doesn't seem like it gets it right. So there's some more troubling upshots of this than you might seem on its face. As we've discussed some intuitive cases, it seems implausible that there could be any fact about my mental state that uniquely denotes the plus function. And by uniquely denotes, I mean it also excludes the quus function or any other, potential host of quus-like options. It just seems like that'd be a strange kind of fact, right? Like this is why the paradox seems strange on its face, and it's kind of doesn't seem to make sense. Is like, well, it seems like a weird kind of fact to be asking for. Like what fact makes it the case that I meant plus when I worked my way through this math sheet for the first 10, 15, 20 problems? Like, I don't know. It's a strange kind of fact to look for. What would it look like? We've looked at some intuitive examples of those kinds of facts, and none of them seem to work. None of them seem to get at what the skeptic's really asking for. So here's the upshot. If there's no fact of the matter that distinguishes my meaning plus from my meaning quus, then there's no fact of the matter as to whether I meant anything at all. Like if no past fact distinguishes that I meant plus, then there's nothing that makes it the case that I meant plus, nothing that makes it the case that I meant anything at all. No facts make it true that I mean plus, then who's to say I actually meant anything? And this gets extra troubling. This is why some people dub this like Kripke's meaning skepticism, is that, well, we used a mathematical example for accessibility and such, and it's easy because it's talking about a function, but the paradox arises in this case for any use of a word at all. So then if the Kripkenstein Bizzare skeptic is right, then there is no such thing as meaning anything by a word. No fact fixes that I meant plus rather than quus. No fact could fix that I meant anything by a word rather than some other thing, partially because of these open to interpretation facts Wittgenstein points out, and partially because of this disjunction we're getting at. So here's an example in ordinary language. I learned how to use the word cat, and I go on using it, and I always see, regular cats, ones with hair and 4 legs and such, and they walk around. And then one day I go over to my friend's house, and they say, "Oh, I've got a new cat," and I walk in, and it's a hairless cat, and I've never seen one of these before, so I didn't even know they existed. So I just go, "Oh, that's a weird looking cat." Well, it's like, well, wait a minute. What makes it the case that I meant cat in those past cases. Maybe what I really meant was quat, where quat just means, well, it's a cat if and only if it has hair, or it's a quat otherwise. So I should call this new thing, this hairless cat, a quat. What distinguishes in all those past cases that when I use the word cat, my use of that word picked out these creatures like some sort of like species essence, as opposed to just the thing I was looking at. Well, it doesn't seem like there is any fact about my using the word cat in the past that covers hairless cats. So then there's no fact of the matter that I meant anything by the word cat. And so there's no such thing as meaning anything by a word. And well, for various reasons, that seems like a troubling and counterintuitive response. Or sorry, not response, conclusion. So, yeah, no such thing as meaning anything by a word. Radical, but fun. So, hopefully this was a clear presentation of what's going on at a basic level in the Kripkenstein Paradox. There's other videos and summaries of it and such, especially in, say, the Stanford Encyclopedia entry on rule following and intentionality. I hope that this was clear enough that you understand what's going on having watched this video. But there's also a lot of nuances and things glossed over. So if you've got the basic idea but would like to know more about anything in particular, let me know, because I hopefully could respond a little bit in comments. I've been trying to work on some blog posts. I'm trying to do like a written up version of a summary of this paradox in about 1,000 words or so that I'll hopefully post to my blog. But I think there's probably a little bit more I could or should say about dispositionalism if it's going to be entirely clear what's going on. So I could do something on that, especially since the paper I wrote was responding to a really recent defense of dispositionalism. I would also like to talk a little bit about what Wittgenstein would say about the Kripkenstein paradox. There's also Ruth Millikan has like a teleosemantic reply to Kripkenstein that I've not read yet, but looks very fun. So I would like to read it, summarize it, talk about it. If anybody would like to come on and talk about this paradox with me, any proposed solutions, or just shoot the breeze about it, great. Shoot me an email or message or something, or in the comments. So yeah, request any clarification on points as needed. I can respond. If nothing else, if I have to completely remake this video because I have no idea what's going on, that's fine. I'll do it. But I hope this was fun and you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun talking about it. This is one of my favorite paradoxes. So thanks for watching, and I will hopefully post some more stuff soon.